Well, tonight, New York City leaders from law enforcement to the mayor and beyond, they're speaking out for yet another day. That is, people now across the country, as these protests expand far beyond the 5 boroughs, are expressing frustration with the grand jury's decision in the Eric Garner probe. Tonight, we're getting reaction from across our region here and also from local officials about that non-decision. And the Department of Justice launching an investigation into the Eric Garner case. The Attorney General, Eric Garner, says the feds will look into whether civil rights were violated. What can the Justice Department really do? And should a special prosecutor have been appointed in the first place to handle this case? Tonight, Mayor Bartlett, he'll join us here and tell us what to expect. Plus, for many, the decision on Staten Island, it has highlighted yet another example of just how deeply the racial divide cuts across this nation, and how a line has been drawn between as many the black community and the police. Why does it seem the police officers are getting away with crimes here that everyday citizens wouldn't be able to get away with themselves? So much for joining us. I'm Richard French, and this evening, as you'd expect, we take a closer look at a case, yet another one, that has rattled this country, this time much closer to home. And again, the commonality: black man killed by a police officer, but yet at least the judicial system didn't see that as a crime. Okay, now, as you can imagine and see in the picture in front of you, people across our region, as well as other parts of the country, they've taken to the streets here in a nonviolent way, but albeit in a protest, to speak out against a grand jury decision not to indict the officer responsible for putting Eric Garner in what turned out to be a deadly chokehold on Staten Island over the summer. Tonight, what we will do is, you'll see the live pictures, you'll hear from people on the ground, but we'll also be hearing from what I believe is one of the most important components in this, because if change is going to happen, if you believe it should happen, it'll happen really with you, the public. So we're going to bring you into our conversation throughout this hour. And our phone lines are open right now. We're opening them up. The toll-free number, you can see it right there on your screen, 888-766-2428. This hour, we decided to have a town hall format, if you will, where you get to weigh in. You'll hear from regular folks on the ground involved in the protest. You'll hear from elected officials. You'll hear from the police union. You'll hear from the mayor of New York. You'll hear from other assorted stakeholders in this conversation, and we'll be hearing from you as well. So both on the phone lines and online, make your opinion heard. But first, let's get reaction from across the region right now, from Newark to Manhattan. And tonight, let's begin with Phyllis One's Natalie Patterson. She's joining us live from probably the biggest demonstration as we speak. It's in Lower Manhattan at Foley Square, and it's underway as we come to you. Natalie, you're on.
Absolutely. Well, as you said, this is one of the larger demonstrations that was scheduled for tonight, and I just want to step out of the shot because you can see this rally, this demonstration has grown so large at this point. The crowd is actually kind of backing out onto Duane Street. I'm sure police are going to try to get these people into the square and out of traffic, because that's what we saw last night. Those who were arrested last night were arrested for blocking traffic. So as you can see, this crowd is sort of just getting bigger and bigger by the minute. We do want to show you, however, what's going on a little bit closer to the main part of Foley Square. As you can see, there are signs that are up in the air. A couple hundred demonstrators at least right now. Many of the people here holding signs that and chanting those words, "I can't breathe," the words of Eric Garner as he was wrestled to the ground on Staten Island just before he died. Again, there are many police officers in this area, many of them standing on the outskirts of the square near the barricades to keep demonstrators, again, from marching into traffic, but they are just kind of coming out of these barricades now. We're watching to see very closely what police do about this. This afternoon, Mayor Bill de Blasio told reporters despite the large number of protests last night, there were only 83 arrests, mainly for minor violations like blocking traffic. Now, speaking of the mayor, he's laid out several changes that are underway as a result of the Garner case. The pilot program for body cameras for the NYPD rolls out tomorrow, and de Blasio says every officer in the city will undergo new training. Protesters here that we spoke to, however, say those changes are not enough to provide the justice that they're calling for. Now, de Blasio says he understands that this is a painful time for many New Yorkers. However, the grand jury's decision regarding the Eric Garner case is not the last chapter here. He says there's still a federal investigation by the U.S. U.S. Attorney General, as well as the NYPD. Reporting live from Foley Square, Natalie Patterson, FiOS 1 News.
Thank you, Natalie. And tonight on Staten Island, protesters gathering peacefully at the very spot where Eric Garner was killed. Reporter Kevin Vesey, he joins us live on Bay Street in Staten Island with a look. Kevin?
Well, Rich, right now you can see that a few dozen people are gathered here at the very spot where Eric Garner died in July after he was taken down in that apparent chokehold by an NYPD officer. The crowd is largely peaceful and pretty quiet. You can see some are holding signs. Many are linked arm in arm right along the sidewalk facing this makeshift memorial here that has sprouted up. You can see the flowers and the candles down there. Now, we spoke earlier with one of these protesters. Take a listen to what she had to say. So why did you come out here tonight?
Because I'm concerned. I think as most of the people are all across the country now. We're concerned about injustices that the youth are having to deal with, you know, because when they look and see what the older generations are going through and then trying to tell them about trusting in the system, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I've grown up on Staten Island, so I've seen many of the things that have gone on. I've lived over a decade, so I've thought I saw what was progress, you know, up until 2011, so to speak. And now we're going through this again, and it hurts your heart. It really hurts your heart.
And back here live on Staten Island, this group is planning a march to the DA's office. Now, we will, of course, follow them and bring you the very latest as it happens. But for now, on Staten Island, Kevin Vesey, FiOS 1 News. Rich.
And thank you, Kevin. And the protests are not relegated just to the 5 boroughs. In fact, we have one underway going on in Newark, New Jersey as we speak. And we're joined right now for more on that by FiOS 1's Raven Santana. Raven?
Rich, just a few moments ago, this entire area at the intersection of West Market Street and Springfield Avenue was filled with protesters who have now marched about a mile down to the federal building located on Broad Street, where they will call on U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and the Justice Department to file civil rights charges against the officer who killed Eric Garner. But I want to show you some video from tonight's protest, where you can see the video of tonight's protest is being called by the People's Organization for Progress in response to the failure of the grand jury to indict the officer in the Eric Garner case. And although these protesters were very loud and very emotional, they were also very peaceful, and there were no signs of violence tonight. There was also a strong police presence here monitoring the area, and tonight we are still expected to hear speeches from community activists as well as residents who have been affected by police brutality, including 2 mothers whose sons were killed by police. Now, I spoke with protesters here tonight who say they are concerned for their own safety.
Because I go through harassment by police every day. That could be me. I could be one of them. Y'all could be holding up a sign saying justice for Laquan Thomas. I go through that every day in law. It's wrong. Just because they officers of the law, they got a badge and a gun, that it make it good for them to do that and with no repercussions behind it, it's not fair. It's not fair at all.
An organizer say they did reach out to Mayor Ras Baraka to see if he would attend the event, but have not heard back from him yet. And we did not see him tonight, at least in this area. We will be heading to the federal building and have much more on the protests. We're live in Newark. Raven Santana, FiOS 1 News. Rich?
Well, thank you very much, Raven. And listen, there's protests. We'll show you more. There's going on in Washington right now and other parts of the country. But the people wanted to hear most from today, and we heard obviously from the Garner family yesterday. We heard from the police union today. We heard from the police department today. And we also heard from Reverend Sharpton today. But the mayor, Bill de Blasio, had very strong words in a statement that he released yesterday. Many people were looking as to what he would be saying the day after. He and Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, they spoke out in a news conference, Bratton saying the grand jury should not be criticized. And the mayor also called for stronger policing. De Blasio announced that all city police officers will undergo retraining, that in response to both public demand and those recent incidents. And tonight, Kimberly Wallace, she's live outside of the Police Academy in Queens with more on that. Kimberly, a different tone from the mayor today, seemingly.
Absolutely, and he wanted to see that retraining program for himself. The New York City mayor, of course, Bill de Blasio, visiting the police academy behind me to view that police retraining underway.
Fundamental questions are being asked, and rightfully so, about how we respect people's rights, how we reduce the use of force in the relationship between police and community, and each encounter between police and community, how we get it right.
The retraining focuses on the foundations of policing, smart policing techniques, and tactical skills.
Some of the training that is being conducted in this academy has been underway for a while and will expand dramatically in the months ahead, where we will be training almost 22,000 police officers, retraining on a 3-day course.
Giving officers, again, more skills and ways to communicate and engage more effectively.
De Blasio says the retraining will help police officers maintain their safety while respecting citizens and improving those relationships.
I think you're going to see a very different reality after this training has been achieved. I think this will protect our officers. I think it will protect the lives of our citizens. I have no doubt that some tragedies will be averted because of this training.
The police retraining will also be incorporated into the lessons for new recruits here at the Police Academy. Live in Queens for RFL, Kimberly Wallace. Rich?
Thank you very much, Kimberly. And tonally, if you will, yesterday it was pretty clear the mayor thought an injustice was done. In fact, he invoked the words of Dr. King in talking about that. And today he did not completely back away from it, but he talked much more about a partnership with the NYPD rather than necessarily being as critical as he was yesterday about the handling by the NYPD. Well, nonetheless, the PBA, the union representing the police, and its president, Pat Lynch, specifically, speaking out about the grand jury's decision in the Eric Garner case. Lynch, he went directly after Mayor de Blasio's comments, saying that he threw police officers under the bus. Our own reporter, Miles Miller, has more on that.
What police officers felt yesterday after that press conference is that they were thrown under the bus.
Tough talk from police union president Pat Lynch, responding to Mayor de Blasio's impassioned speech about his own fears as the father of a black teenage son.
Shalane and I have had to talk to Dante for years about the dangers that he may face. We've had to literally train him, as families have all over this city for decades, in how to take special care in any encounter he has with the police officers.
Lynch slammed the comments, saying the city is safe because of police, and New Yorkers should fear the criminals, not rank-and-file officers.
We need to teach our children and everyone that you cannot resist arrest, even if you believe that the arrest is unjust.
Over 1,000 officers from commands across the city worked late into Wednesday night, containing crowds on the street and underground as protesters sought to make their voices heard. Lynch praised the grand jury's decision, saying they got it right. He insisted Officer Pantaleo used an authorized takedown maneuver, not what appears to be a chokehold.
A chokehold is directly around the neck and brought to the ground where it restricts your breathing. If you look at the video impassionately, it was a seatbelt or a takedown maneuver.
The police union saying late this afternoon they are confident when the Internal Affairs Bureau completes its investigation, Officer Pantaleo will be cleared of any disciplinary action. At police headquarters in Lower Manhattan, Miles Miller, FiOS 1 News.
All right, Miles. We're going to get to a lot more. And if you didn't hear today, Reverend Sharpton, he laid out both a compelling argument as to what's going to happen next weekend in a major march on Washington, if you will, that will be taking place next Saturday. We'll talk about that, but also where he lays out the double standard, and you can be your own judge if you think it's fair or not. We're going to bring up the banner at the bottom with the phone number. It'll be up there throughout the hour. We'll keep reminding you our toll-free number because we'll be going to your phone calls very shortly, but I want to bring in the panel here. Let's, and there you see the toll-free number, and also inviting you to get involved online as well. Let me introduce you, Mayo Bartlett, a familiar face here, an attorney, and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. He's a criminal defense attorney now, but he handles a lot of civil rights cases. I can't think of another person who can better explain not just what's going on, but also where the DOJ, the Justice Department, could be coming in on this as well. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, and Andrew's been sampling what's been going on in terms of both sound from Washington and also closer to home from a lot of those stakeholders in terms of where they're calling for, if you want the political temperature of this. But okay, don't put on your attorney hat first, okay, or even your prosecutor hat that you've worn at different times. Talk as a dad and talk as a citizen, informed by your background with the police, but also the criminal justice system. Why so much frustration now? I've heard different theories on it, that this has been going on for a while. Is it because of confluence of events that, Staten Island happened so soon thereafter, at least in grand jury decisions from Ferguson? Is it that the video was the final, punctuation point to this? This has been building, but why, from a guy who's handled high-profile cases too, why are we where we are right now, Mayo, where before it was a one-day story?
Well, I think we're there now because if you go back to Rodney King, I think the nation was shocked to see what happened to Rodney King in the wake of a DWI allegation that he was beaten by so many officers and so mercilessly in a way that a judge could never order that as a sentence. And it was one of the first times that we actually captured it on video, on television. And there was no conviction in the state courts. Today we have, with social media, with the ability to have a cell phone that can act as a camera, the ability to record and capture things that we didn't have before. So before, it would typically be your word against the word of the police officers, and any of us around this table would have a difficult time if it's us against the word of a police officer. But when you have video that supports what you say, you would expect that a grand jury, that a prosecutor's office would see that, and that the truth would be shown, and basically things would work out well. What we have today is we have case after case where the video clearly shows something different than what was suggested by law enforcement, and there are no repercussions for members of law enforcement. So it makes you lose faith in the system. And I can go back, if you go back 30, 40 years ago, if something happened in the African American community, you would call 911. And you would go to the police and you would expect that the police would help you. And maybe not as much as in the white community, but certainly there was an expectation that that was what the police were there to do. We now have also a number of cases where the police are killing people who are there on medical calls, or helpless people like Eleanor Bumpers who could barely move. So there is a feeling now that you don't necessarily call 911, that calling 911 may be worse than you perhaps going to grab your loved one and drive them to the hospital yourself.
And even if we didn't have video, thanks to social media, I mean, back in the day, the Ferguson story might have been local to St. Louis, Cleveland might have been local to Cleveland, Florida. Now we all know, and it's easy enough to find with a few keystrokes or looking at your Twitter feed, another one that's happened here, another one that's happened in Cleveland, and then you start to unpack it and you get into the details in a way that we just weren't able to do even a few years ago. I think that's part of it.
There was... It's hard to quantify, and you can't even, because everybody's different, but there seems to be two forms of reaction, both after Ferguson and then after this, from the folks that didn't agree with the grand jury decision. One is anger, sometimes to the point of rage, but certainly anger. You see that in some of the demonstrations, albeit they've been nonviolent across the board since at least the Garner case. But then there's a resignation, Mayo, that says, hey, we've been telling you this for a while, you're finally listening, but nothing's going to change. Maybe I'm naive, but I've seen different tipping points when we've had conversations about change. I mean, I can almost tell you when you can almost feel the debate on gay marriage changing in this country, whatever. The Attorney General, we're going to talk about this, Andrew will give the details, went to Cleveland today. They're not going to let that case go as to the officer who shot that 12-year-old boy. We saw a conviction today, or at least a charge today as it relates to, in South Carolina, a murder case as well. The Department of Justice picking up this case. And I don't think it's just for cosmetic purposes. You get the sense that not just the public's not willing to let it go, or at least a portion of the public, but also stakeholders know that this is not going to end well if this keeps happening. Forget about that it's wrong, that they're not going to let it go. Do you get that sense, or do you say, I've seen this before, Rich, this is a 2-week cosmetic dance here, nothing's really going to change?
No, I think that there is something different here, and it's the fact that it's happening all over the country. And the cases we're talking about are a very, very small percentage of similar cases. So most of these cases we never learn of, and they happen in our own communities. You're not even aware that this has happened. But when you have the video, and you have a young man who's in handcuffs on a train platform who gets shot and killed by the police, when you have the women who are at the Occupy Wall Street protesting, they're behind a barricade and they get maced by the police and nothing happens to the officers, it's a fear across the board. And it's not simply in the African American community. If you look at the protests in New York City, they're very diverse groups of people. They're diverse in terms of economics, diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, gender. People are afraid, and they're fearful that when they interact with law enforcement, they just don't know what they're going to get. It used to be understood that there were a few bad officers out there, but it's happening so frequently and nothing is done to address those officers that now you don't know who you have. For instance, in Cleveland, it was discussed earlier today that that officer who shot the 12-year-old boy couldn't make basic decisions. He was unable to deal with information.
Removed from a police force.
Removed from a police force because he wasn't able to process his thoughts properly. I mean, so how does this person have a badge and a gun, and how is he taken from one police force and then brought to another?
Boy,
and
I hope you're right, Mayo. I really do hope that we're at a tipping point. Maybe I'm more cynical about it. I hear the arguments from Pat Lynch, which is similar to the argument that we heard from Peter King, of all people, who's saying that, boy, if only he hadn't resisted arrest, none of this would have happened. And you heard that in Ferguson, and you've heard that in other cases too. And there's, I think, enough of a group that thinks, boy, Eric Garner contributed to his own death, and that provides enough justification to the police for these actions that the three of us find reprehensible.
But you know what? And you're close to it, and I know we're gonna go break, but. And I'm not comparing or connoting, please don't miss any. I want to give all the caveats. I'm not comparing the two situations. But I did a lot in covering the Catholic Church and the abuses that happen. And I'm practicing Catholic, so I'm very invested in the subject. A small percentage of priests were doing horrific things. And they were aided and abetted by folks who allowed this abuse to continue. And among the victims, obviously the first and foremost, was those children. But the other victims were not just the lady, but all the good priests who got tarred by that. Finally, the church came to a realization that, forget the ethics and just the morality of it was just so bad. But you can't have a whole institution defined by the worst minority of it, the worst perpetrators of it. If a cop is bad, it's in the police's best interest to address it. At a certain point, every institution figures that out, albeit too long. And I think that if we create a system where it's like you can't go to the police or trust the police, you can't cooperate with the police for investigations, we're all the worse off for it. So I believe there will be retraining at the NYPD. For whatever reason they're doing it, they're going to do it, but it'll be a little bit more clear what to do. The scariest part for me is after today, I'm not clear if you're a police officer, if you think you can still do a chokehold or not. For all that we've talked about, it's still not clear. Was it allowed or not allowed what he did? And there's a lot of people who share that responsibility that there still isn't clarity on that subject. All right, we're going to jump to a break. When we come back, the three of us will open up the phone lines to you at home. I see you folks are on the lines. We'll get to those. And also, I'll share with you some more sound today, not just from Pat Lynch and the mayor, but also from Al Sharpton. And listen, I've got my problems with the Reverend, certainly documented well over the years where he and I part company, but he said a lot of fascinating things today. I'll let you hear for yourself. We'll be back with more.